Rokus, and it's Bible story time. I'm going to read to you one of the stories out of this book called Bible Stories Rock that I wrote using rocks and pebbles to tell the stories, at least for the pictures. And I thought it'd be fun if I read to you one of the stories out of the book. Now, the story I want to tell you about is Joseph of Egypt. Now, that's what this picture is about. We have a camel, and then we have Joseph with his head bowed and his hands behind his back because he's been taken as a slave to be sold into Egypt. If you'd like to make some rock art of this story, I did make a free handout that you can print out yourself. Would you like to hear that story? It's a really important one that we find in the Old Testament at the end of the book of Genesis. Now, this is back when there was Abraham, the great prophet, who then had a son named Isaac, and then he had a son named Jacob, and then Jacob had 12 sons and one daughter. And the 12 sons became very important in our world history because you probably heard of the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, one of those sons was Joseph. And when Joseph was only 17 years old, his brothers sold him. Isn't that crazy? They didn't like him very much, and they were going to kill him, but then they thought better of it. And when some slave traders came through, they gave him to the slave traders, and the slave traders took him off to Egypt, a foreign country. Now, I can't imagine how Joseph must have felt. That'd be horrible. That's worse than moving. Well, Joseph ended up being sold to a man named Potiphar and his house. Kind of a strange name, Potiphar. But he was captain of Pharaoh's guard, so he was really important. So he must have had lots of land and homes and assets. And Joseph was sold to him. But Joseph did such a great work there in Potiphar's house that Joseph became trusted and loved, and he became second in command to Potiphar, and he was able to run all the affairs of the house. Now, that's pretty amazing to go from being a slave to then being a ruler in Potiphar's house. Well, how does somebody do that? How do you have such a terrible situation and then you rise to the occasion and you're successful there? Well, there's something very special about Joseph, and the Bible tells us what it is. But let me first tell you what happened next. So things were going pretty well for Joseph, but Potiphar's wife was not a good lady. And she was trying to do some naughty things with Joseph, but Joseph refused because he knew better. He knew that marriage is sacred and important, and so he wasn't going to do anything with Potiphar's wife. But that made her really embarrassed that he wouldn't, and then she got mad. And then the worst thing is she told her husband a lie. She told her husband that Joseph was naughty. And so the husband got really mad and he threw Joseph into prison. That was really sad because it wasn't Joseph's fault. Have you ever been blamed for something that really wasn't your fault? Well, that's what happened to Joseph, but he got thrown into prison. And you would think that would be like the most terrible thing. But the Bible tells us that the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph, even in prison, even when he was a slave. The Lord was always with Joseph. So some really bad things can happen and unfair things can happen, but God can still be with us. And that's what made all the difference for Joseph. Joseph kept the commandments. He trusted God. He loved God, and God was with him. So in prison, an amazing thing happened. He did the best he could do in prison, and he kept the commandments, and he was a good person in prison even. And the head of all of the prison inmates, the guard, he noticed Joseph, and he trusted Joseph so much that he made him in charge of all the inmates and all the things that went on in the prison. So once again, Joseph went from the worst situation to making the best of it. Now, one day in prison, he noticed two really sad prisoners, and he asked them what was wrong. And they said, "We had really bad dreams," and they didn't understand them. And Joseph said, "Well, you know who understands dreams the very best? It's God." And God had given Joseph the gift of interpreting dreams, of making sense of them. So Joseph said, "Tell me what you dreamt." And they did. And for the butler, who had been kicked out of Pharaoh's house and thrown into prison because Pharaoh wasn't happy with him? Well, the dream meant that he would be set free from prison and he would go back to Pharaoh's house and be a butler again. So he was really happy, and it actually came true. A few days later, the butler was freed and sent out of prison. Now Joseph told the butler, he said, now don't forget me. Tell the Pharaoh about me because I'm in prison unfairly and maybe you can help me out. And the butler said, okay. But guess what happened? The butler didn't do it. He forgot. Or I don't know why he didn't, but he didn't help out Joseph. So Joseph was in prison for another 2 years. You would think that somebody who loves God so much, and because God is with him, then maybe bad things wouldn't happen. But I think in this life, the opportunity is for us to love God no matter what. And in the end, God does help us out of our hard situations. And he helps us while we're in them, just like he did for Joseph. Well, eventually, a couple years later, Pharaoh, who's the big king of all of Egypt, Pharaoh had a bad dream and he didn't understand what it meant. And the butler said to Pharaoh, oh, I remember there's a Hebrew boy in prison who knows how to interpret dreams. And Pharaoh said, well, bring him over. And so they brought him out of prison and brought him before Pharaoh, the great king. And Pharaoh told him his dream. And Joseph said, well, do you know who's the best interpreter of all dreams? And Pharaoh said, you? And Joseph said, no, God is the interpreter. And God gave the gift to Joseph to be able to understand Pharaoh's dream. And he told him what it meant. He said, Pharaoh, your dream means that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, of abundance, of lots of food, and the crops will grow well, and everything will be great. And then there will be 7 years of sadness and hardship and hunger and misery if you don't prepare, because there won't be any food. There'll be a great famine. A famine means when you can't grow the food and there's no food available. Well, Pharaoh was amazed, and he felt in his heart that that was true, that Joseph told him the truth. And he was so impressed with Joseph because somehow Pharaoh knew that God was with Joseph. And Pharaoh said, I don't think there's anybody else around here like you. I think you should be in charge of all of everything in my land and help us prepare for the great famine that's coming. And Joseph said, okay, I'll do it. Because Joseph always did his best in any situation, and he trusted that God was with him. So Pharaoh made him in charge, and this is many years after Joseph had left his home. Remember, he was only 17 when he had to leave, but now he's 30 years old, and now he's in charge of storing up all the food and grain for 7 years. Well, 7 years went by, and Pharaoh gave Joseph a wife. And so now Joseph was a dad, and he had 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh were their names. And he had a beautiful, lovely wife, and things were going so well for him. And then the 7 years passed, and then guess what happened? The famine came, the drought, and no food was able to be grown, just like the dream said. But in Egypt, it was okay, because they had stored up and prepared for this time that would come. Well, meanwhile, way back in Joseph's original home with his dad and his 11 brothers, well, they were experiencing the famine too, and they didn't have any food, and they were going to die of starvation. But all the land throughout all the world, they knew that Egypt had stores of food they had prepared, and they thought, well, maybe if we go to Egypt, we might be able to buy some food there. Now, you'll remember, they didn't know that Joseph was still alive. Dad thought he had been killed by a wild animal. And the brothers, they probably just thought that he had died after all this time. So they were just going to Egypt to buy some food. Well, who was in charge of selling all the food in Egypt? It was Joseph. And now Joseph was this great ruler, and he was a man and a father by that time, no longer just a teenager. So the family traveled all the way to Egypt, and they went before this great ruler, right? He would be older, and they didn't recognize him. It was Joseph. But they went through the great ruler and said, please help us. We need some food. And do you know what happened? Joseph recognized him and knew it was his family. And he was so excited to see them, even though they had been so mean years and years ago. Well, he set up some tests to find out if they had become good people, if his brothers had become, if they had felt sorry for what they did, and if they had become better. And they passed the test. They had become better people. And so Joseph was able to give food to the family and have them go back and get their dad and bring all of their things to Egypt and live in Egypt where there was plenty of food. And they did. And that's how the Israelites, or the nations from which Joseph came from, and the 12 tribes of Israel, that's how they all ended up in Egypt. It was because Joseph was able to feed them, and this great miracle was able to happen. Can you see how God can take terrible things that happen and he can turn them into amazing things? It doesn't make any sense at the time when we're miserable and hard things are happening. But later on, somehow God is able to turn those things for our good. I know that's true because when I was a kid, I had some terrible things that happened. But now, years later, because of those things, I have learned how to trust in God and love him and know that he is with me. And I know that you can trust in God too, no matter what happens. And especially in your hard times, you can have hope that good things will come because God is with you. That's what we learn from this story of Joseph. Now, let me just remind you of the power wheel. Now, the reason we have these great Bible stories is to teach us how to have faith in God, how to trust him, and how to live powerfully. Well, the faith wheel is faith, hope, and charity. And when those three things come together, pow! There's great power inside of us so that we can live through these hard things and make it through, and that we can still have joy and peace no matter what. So what is faith, hope, and charity? Well, especially charity, that's a big word. In this way, it means the pure love of Jesus Christ. That's what real charity is. So when we have the love of Jesus Christ for ourselves and for the whole world and for other people, then we have access to God's power. But we also need the two other things. We need faith and hope. Faith that God is real, that God is all powerful, that he can do anything in our lives, and that he loves us. That's what faith is. So we learn about God to build our faith, to get stronger and stronger in that knowledge. And then there's hope. Hope that good things are to come. Have you ever felt so sad and miserable and you thought nothing would ever get better again? I've felt like that. Well, hope is the opposite. Hope is when no matter how hard things are, we know that somehow there will be a miracle and somehow things will get better. That's hope. And when we have hope in Jesus Christ, that he can make things better and that we can be healed and everybody can be made whole again, that is powerful. So when you combine your faith that God is great and your hope that things will get better through Jesus Christ and your charity, your pure love of Christ for everyone, those come together and create great power inside of us. And then we can see how each of these characters in these Bible stories had great power because of their faith, hope, and charity, and were able to do great things. Now, if you're interested, I do have a little handout that you can print out for free, and you can do your own rock art and write your own journal entry. Where did I put it? I'll show you. Oh, here it is. So for the Joseph story, you can print out this little one-pager right here. And I sketched out the camel and the slave Joseph so we can remember the hardships. And you can put your rocks and pebbles on that, and it would look like this, where you can have, there's just a few rocks that I put on it, and I'll show you how to do it in another video that you can watch on how to make your own rock art of this scene. And then there's a little journal entry page here where you can write about faith, hope, and charity and how Joseph had those. I also have a little way for you to link to this video and watch it again, and then the art that I made too. So it's all just on one page that you can print out and do, and that's on my website, BibleStoriesRock.com. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, bye-bye.